Margaret had always loved Sunday mornings. There was something peaceful about the church before everyone arrived, when the light came through the stained glass windows and made colorful patterns on the wooden floors. She'd been coming to St. Mary's for over 40 years now, first as a young mother bringing her own children, and for the last 20 years as the church secretary. That October morning felt like any other. She woke up at 6, made herself a cup of coffee, and drove the familiar route down Maple Street to the church. The air had that crisp feeling that comes right before winter, and the trees were showing off their best colors. Margaret pulled into the empty parking lot at 7:15, a full hour and 45 minutes before the service would start. She had her routine down perfectly. First, she'd unlock the heavy wooden doors. Then she'd turn on the lights in the sanctuary, check that the altar looked proper, and make sure there were enough programs printed for the morning service. After that came her favorite part, walking through each row of pews, straightening the cushions and placing fresh hymnals where they'd been left scattered from the evening before. Margaret pushed open the church doors and stepped inside. Everything seemed normal. The familiar smell of old wood and candle wax greeted her like an old friend. She flipped on the lights and started her usual walk-through, humming quietly to herself. She was about halfway down the third row when she heard it, a small sound, barely noticeable at first. Margaret stopped humming and tilted her head, listening. There it was again, a soft whimpering like a kitten might make. But St. Mary's didn't have any cats. Father Tom was allergic. The sound was coming from the back of the church. Margaret felt her heart start to beat a little faster as she walked toward the last few pews. Maybe it was just the old building settling, or the wind coming through a crack somewhere. But no, there it was again, clearer this time. That was definitely not the wind. When Margaret reached the last pew on the right side, she saw something that made her stop dead in her tracks. There, nestled in the corner of the wooden bench, was a bundle of blankets. And the bundle was moving. Her hands flew to her mouth. For a moment she couldn't move, couldn't think. Then her body took over, doing what it had done 3 times before when her own babies needed her. She reached down and carefully pulled back the edge of the blanket. A tiny face looked up at her. The smallest baby Margaret had ever seen was lying there, wrapped snugly in a soft blue blanket that looked hand-knitted. The infant couldn't have been more than a few days old. Her little face was scrunched up, and she was making those small crying sounds that newborns make when they're just starting to wake up. Margaret's hands were shaking as she lifted the baby out of the pew. The child was so light, so fragile. She held her close to her chest, and the baby's crying stopped almost immediately. Margaret looked around the empty church, her mind racing. How did this baby get here? Where was the mother? Was someone hurt? Did they need help? That's when she noticed the other things in the pew. Tucked beside where the baby had been lying was a small brown teddy bear, the kind you might buy at any department store. And there, placed carefully on top of the blanket, was a white envelope. Margaret could see her own name written on it in neat handwriting. To whoever finds her. Margaret's legs felt weak. She sat down in the pew, still holding the baby close, and stared at that envelope. Part of her didn't want to open it. Part of her knew that once she read what was inside, everything would change. But the baby was starting to fuss again, and Margaret knew she needed to do something. With one hand still supporting the infant, she managed to pick up the envelope and tear it open. Inside was a single piece of notebook paper, the kind with lines on it that kids use in school. The handwriting was the same as on the envelope, careful and neat, like someone had taken their time. Margaret read the words once, then twice, then a third time. Her eyes filled with tears. Please give her the life I cannot. She deserves to know God's love. Her name is Hope, that was all it said. No signature, no explanation, no phone number or way to reach whoever had written it. Just those 2 sentences and a name. Hope. Margaret looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had stopped crying and was looking up at her with those unfocused eyes that newborns have. She was so small, so perfect, so completely helpless. Someone had brought her here and left her, trusting that she would be found, that she would be safe. The thought made Margaret's chest ache. She'd been a mother. She knew what it felt like to hold your baby for the first time, to feel that fierce love that takes over your whole body. She couldn't imagine the kind of desperation it would take to walk away from that. Whatever circumstances had led to this moment, they must have been unbearable. Margaret knew she needed to call someone. The police, certainly. Probably social services, too. But for just a moment longer, she sat there in that quiet church holding a baby named Hope, and let herself feel the weight of what had just happened. The morning sun was getting brighter now, streaming through the windows and filling the sanctuary with light. In a little over an hour, people would start arriving for the service. They'd come in their Sunday clothes, chatting about the weather and the upcoming church potluck. They'd have no idea that their church had just become part of a story that would change everything. Margaret finally stood up, adjusting her hold on the baby. Her phone was in her purse in the office. She needed to make those calls. But as she walked toward the front of the church, she found herself talking softly to the infant in her arms. "It's going to be okay, little one," she whispered. "I don't know what happened or why you're here, but you're safe now. We're going to take care of you." The baby made a small sound, almost like she understood. Margaret felt something shift in her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. It was the feeling of being needed, of having a purpose beyond the usual routine of her days. She didn't know it yet, but this morning would mark the beginning of something that would shake their small town to its core. Within weeks, everyone in Riverside Springs would know the name Hope. They'd be talking about her in the grocery store, at the diner, in their own church pews. The mystery of who left her and why would consume the community. But right now, in this moment, it was just Margaret and a baby who needed help. Everything else would come later. First, she needed to make sure this child was warm, fed, and safe. That's what any mother would do. And that's exactly what Margaret intended to do. She reached the church office and fumbled for her phone, still holding Hope carefully against her shoulder. Her hands were steadier now. She had a job to do, and Margaret had never been one to back down from something important. As she dialed 911, she looked down at the baby one more time. Those tiny fingers were curled into little fists. That small chest was rising and falling with each breath. Hope was alive, and she was here. And whatever came next, Margaret was determined to make sure this child's story had a happy ending. The operator answered, and Margaret took a deep breath. "Yes, I need to report something. I'm at St. Mary's Episcopal Church on Main Street. I've just found an abandoned infant." And with those words, everything began. The police arrived within 10 minutes, but to Margaret it felt like an hour. She'd stayed in the office, rocking the baby gently and wondering if she should try to find some formula. Did newborns this young even drink formula? It had been so long since her own children were babies. Officer James Chen was the first through the door. Margaret had seen him around town, knew he had 2 kids of his own who played soccer at the community field. He looked young to her, probably early 30s, but his face was serious as he took in the scene. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, his voice gentle, "I understand you found an infant?" Margaret nodded and carefully stood up, still holding Hope close. "She was in the back pew, just lying there when I came in this morning. There's a note." She gestured to the desk where she'd placed the envelope and the teddy bear. James pulled on a pair of gloves before picking up the paper, reading it carefully. His expression didn't change, but Margaret saw his jaw tighten slightly. "Just this? Nothing else?" "Nothing," Margaret said. "Just the blanket, the bear, and that note. She can't be more than a few days old. Maybe a week at most." More people started arriving. 2 more police officers, then a woman from social services carrying a car seat and a bag that Margaret assumed had baby supplies. Then Detective Linda Rodriguez showed up, a woman Margaret recognized from the newspaper when she'd solved that string of break-ins last year. Linda was in her mid-40s, with short dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She spoke with Margaret for nearly an hour, asking questions about every detail. What time did she arrive? Were the doors locked? Did she see anyone outside? Any cars in the parking lot? Had there been any unusual activity at the church recently? Margaret answered everything as best she could, but the truth was simple. She'd arrived like she did every Sunday, and the baby was there. No signs of anyone else, no sounds, nothing unusual at all except for one impossibly small human being left in a pew. "The baby seems healthy," the social services worker said, examining Hope with practiced hands. "Well-fed, clean, properly dressed for the weather. Whoever left her made sure she was comfortable. I'd guess she was placed here sometime after midnight, but before 6 this morning. That's when the last service ended yesterday and when Mrs. Sullivan arrived. We'll need to take her to the hospital," Linda said. "Get her checked out properly, run some tests. Is that okay with you, Mrs. Sullivan?" Margaret found herself reluctant to let go. She'd only been holding this baby for maybe an hour, but something had already taken root in her heart. Still, she knew it was necessary. She handed Hope over to the social worker, who placed her gently in the car seat. "Can I visit her?" Margaret asked. "I just want to make sure she's okay." Linda gave her a kind smile. "Let us get her settled first. But yes, I'll make sure you get the information on where she'll be staying." The church filled up with police over the next few hours. They took photos of everything, dusted for fingerprints, looked through the donation box to see if anyone had left anything suspicious. Father Tom arrived in the middle of it all, shocked to find his church crawling with officers. By the time the morning service was supposed to start, word had spread through the small town like wildfire. People showed up not knowing if there would be a service, but curious about what had happened. Father Tom made the decision to hold it anyway, and Margaret found herself sitting in a pew surrounded by neighbors, all of them whispering about the baby. "I heard she was left in a basket," Mrs. Chen from the flower shop whispered. "Someone said there was blood on the blanket," added her daughter, eyes wide. Margaret wanted to correct them, to tell them the real story, but she was too tired. She just closed her eyes and prayed for that little girl, wherever she was now. The next few days were a blur. The local newspaper ran the story on the front page, "Infant found abandoned at local church." The headline made Margaret's stomach turn. It sounded so cold, so clinical. This wasn't just a news story. This was a baby who needed a family. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. People started calling the church asking how they could help. Did the baby need clothes? Formula, diapers? Families came forward saying they wanted to foster her. The local moms group organized a donation drive. Within 48 hours, they'd collected enough baby supplies to fill an entire room. Margaret visited Hope every single day. The hospital had checked her over and confirmed she was healthy, about 5 days old, they estimated, based on when her umbilical cord had been cut. After 2 days, she was released to a temporary foster family, the Kowalskis, who lived just outside town and had fostered dozens of babies over the years. "She's doing great," Mrs. Kowalski told Margaret during one visit. "Eating well, sleeping like a dream. Whoever her mother is, she took good care of her before letting her go." That phrase stuck with Margaret. Letting her go. Not abandoning, not dumping. Letting go. Like it was a choice made out of love rather than cruelty. She found herself wondering constantly about the woman who wrote that note. How old was she? Was she alone? Was she safe? Detective Rodriguez was wondering the same things. The investigation had hit wall after wall. The fingerprints from the envelope didn't match anything in the system. The blanket and teddy bear were both from common stores, the kind you could buy anywhere. The handwriting analysis showed someone who wrote carefully but provided no identifying characteristics. Linda had reviewed security footage from every business with a camera within a 3-mile radius of the church. Most places didn't have cameras at all. Riverside Springs was the kind of town where people still didn't lock their doors. The few cameras they found showed nothing unusual. No one walking with a baby in the early morning hours. No cars stopping near the church. "It's like she appeared out of thin air," Linda told Margaret during one of their conversations. They'd developed an unlikely friendship over the past week, bonded by their shared concern for Hope. Whoever left her knew what they were doing. They were careful, deliberate. "Does that mean you might never find out who the mother is?" Margaret asked, her heart sinking. "I didn't say that," Linda replied. "We've sent DNA samples to the state lab. It takes a few weeks to process, but if the parents or any close relatives are in any database, criminal, genealogy, whatever, we'll get a match. And I've been talking to doctors, midwives, anyone who might have helped deliver a baby recently. Someone knows something. They always do." The town remained obsessed with the story. The local diner had a jar on the counter collecting money for Hope's future. The high school started a fundraiser. Church groups across town, not just St. Mary's, were praying for both the baby and her unknown mother. But there were darker whispers too. Some people thought the police weren't doing enough. Others speculated wildly about who the mother might be. Margaret overheard conversations at the grocery store, people pointing fingers at this teenage girl or that single woman who looked stressed. "Maybe it's someone from out of town," one woman suggested loudly in the checkout line. "Or maybe it's someone right here and we just don't want to see it," another responded. Margaret wanted to tell them all to mind their own business, to show some compassion. But she kept quiet, paid for her groceries, and went home. 3 weeks after finding Hope, Margaret was at the Kowalski house for her daily visit when her phone rang. It was Linda. "Mrs. Sullivan, can you come down to the station? There's something I need to discuss with you." The tone in Linda's voice made Margaret's stomach drop. "Is it about Hope? Is she okay?" "She's fine," Linda assured her. "But we got the DNA results back, and Margaret, this case just got a lot more complicated." Margaret made excuses to the Kowalskis and drove straight to the police station, her mind racing through possibilities. Had they found the mother? Was she in trouble? Was she hurt? When she arrived, Linda led her to a small conference room. The detective's face was hard to read, a mixture of surprise and something else Margaret couldn't quite identify. "The DNA came back with a match," Linda said, sitting down across from Margaret. "But not in the way we expected." "What do you mean?" Linda pulled out a folder and opened it. "Hope's DNA matches a family in our system, a very specific family. The Whitmores." Margaret felt her blood run cold. Everyone in Riverside Springs knew the Whitmore family. Thomas Whitmore owned the manufacturing plant that employed nearly half the town. His grandfather had founded it back in the 1940s, and it had grown into the backbone of their local economy. The Whitmores lived in the biggest house in town, the one on the hill with the circular driveway and the fountain in front. They were at every town council meeting, every charity event, every church function. Thomas's wife, Jennifer, ran the historical society. Their 3 kids went to private schools before the oldest, Ethan, went off to college last year. The Whitmores were Riverside Springs royalty. "How is that possible?" Margaret whispered. "The match is to Ethan Whitmore," Linda continued. "Thomas and Jennifer's son. He's 19, freshman at State University. According to the DNA, he's Hope's father." Margaret sat back in her chair trying to process this information. Ethan Whitmore. She'd seen him around town during his high school years. Quiet kid, always polite, usually had his nose in a book. She'd never heard any rumors about him having a girlfriend. "Does he know?" Margaret asked. "I spoke with him 2 hours ago," Linda said. "Called him at school. He confirmed it immediately. Said he'd been dating a girl named Maya Torres since their junior year of high school. They'd kept it quiet because of—" Linda paused, choosing her words carefully. "Because of the family situation." "The family situation?" "Maya's mother, Rosa Torres, works for the Whitmores. Has for the past 15 years. She's their housekeeper." And suddenly it all made sense. The secrecy, the desperation, the careful way Hope had been left somewhere she'd be found and cared for. This wasn't just about a scared young mother. This was about class, about expectations, about the impossible situation of a teenage girl who worked in the house where her boyfriend lived, whose mother cleaned the floors he walked on. Margaret thought about all the times she'd seen Rosa Torres at church, sitting quietly in the back, leaving quickly after service to go back to work. She thought about the Whitmores in their front pew, heads held high, examples of success and stability. And somewhere between those two families, in that complicated space where money and power met hard work and quiet dignity, a baby had been born that nobody was supposed to know about. "Where's Maya now?" Margaret asked. "That's what we're trying to find out," Linda said. "She hasn't been home in 2 days. Her mother is frantic. We need to find her and make sure she's okay. Women who've just given birth need medical attention." Margaret stood up. "Then what are we waiting for? Let's find her." The investigation had just taken a turn that would shake Riverside Springs to its foundation. The news spread through Riverside Springs faster than anything Margaret had ever seen. By the next morning, everyone seemed to know that the abandoned baby belonged to the Whitmore family. Or rather, to Ethan Whitmore and Maya Torres. The girl whose mother cleaned their mansion had secretly been dating their son. And now there was a baby that nobody knew what to do with. Margaret couldn't stop thinking about Maya. She was 18 years old, just graduated from high school and somewhere out there dealing with everything alone. The police had put out what they called a welfare check, asking anyone who'd seen her to call in. But so far, nothing. Rosa Torres had come to see Margaret at the church 2 days after the DNA results came back. The older woman looked like she'd aged 10 years in a matter of weeks. Her eyes were red from crying, and her hands shook as she held a cup of tea that Margaret had made for her. "I didn't know," Rosa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had no idea she was pregnant. How did I not see it? I'm her mother. I should have known." Margaret reached across the table and took Rosa's hand. "Sometimes our children hide things from us because they're trying to protect us. It doesn't mean you failed her. She wore baggy clothes all year, Rosa continued as if she hadn't heard Margaret. I thought she was just going through a phase, you know how teenagers are. And she was always helping me with work, staying busy. I thought she was just being a good kid helping her mama. When did you realize she was gone? Rosa's face crumpled. 3 days ago. She left a note saying she needed time to think, that she was staying with a friend. But I called all her friends. Nobody has seen her. And then the police came and told me about the baby, about the DNA test, and I realized. She couldn't finish the sentence. Margaret learned the full story in pieces over the next few days, as the police investigation uncovered what had been happening under everyone's noses for almost 2 years. Ethan and Maya had met during his junior year of high school. Maya would come with her mother to the Whitmore house after school sometimes, doing homework in the kitchen while Rosa finished her work. Ethan had wandered in one day looking for a snack, and they'd started talking about a book they were both reading. That conversation led to more conversations. Those conversations led to texts, then secret meetings after Maya's mother went home. They'd meet at the public library, or the park on the edge of town, anywhere they wouldn't be seen together. Because they both knew what would happen if anyone found out. Thomas Whitmore had plans for his son, Detective Rodriguez explained to Margaret during one of their many conversations. Elite college, law school, take over the family business. A teenage romance with the housekeeper's daughter wasn't part of that plan. But they're just kids, Margaret protested. Kids fall in love. That's what they do. Not in families like the Whitmores, Linda said quietly. Not when there's that much money and reputation at stake. Maya had realized she was pregnant in January. By then, Ethan was already away at college, and she was terrified. She'd taken 3 different tests from 3 different drugstores in 3 different towns, hoping each time that the result would be different. But they all said the same thing. She'd told Ethan over the phone. According to what he'd shared with the police, he'd wanted to come home immediately, to tell their families together to figure something out. But Maya had begged him not to. She knew what would happen. His family would blame her, maybe blame her mother too. Rosa could lose her job. The Whitmores had enough influence in this town to make their lives very difficult, so Maya had hidden it. She'd worn loose clothes, avoided her mother as much as possible, made excuses about why she wasn't eating much. She'd researched everything online. What to expect, how to give birth alone if she had to, what supplies she'd need. She gave birth in her bedroom, Linda told Margaret, her voice heavy, alone in the middle of the night while her mother was asleep down the hall. Can you imagine? 18 years old, going through that with no one to help her? Margaret couldn't imagine. She'd had her 3 babies in hospitals with doctors and nurses and her husband holding her hand. The thought of Maya doing it alone, biting down on something to keep from screaming, terrified and in pain, it made her feel physically sick. Maya had cleaned everything up, hidden the evidence, and taken care of the baby for 5 days. She'd kept Hope in her room, feeding her with formula she'd secretly bought, holding her when she cried, loving her the way any new mother loves their baby. But Maya knew she couldn't keep it secret forever. Her mother would find out. The baby would cry too loud. Someone would notice. And then what? How could she finish school, get a job, take care of a baby when she could barely take care of herself? That's when she'd made the hardest decision of her life. She would take Hope somewhere safe, somewhere she knew the baby would be found and cared for. St. Mary's Church, where Maya had been baptized as a baby, where her mother went every Sunday without fail. If anyone would love and protect Hope, it would be the people there. The police found all of this out by tracking Maya's phone records, her internet searches, and by talking to Ethan, who'd been cooperative once he realized there was no point in hiding anymore. But they still didn't know where Maya was. She could be anywhere, Rosa said, her voice breaking. What if something happened to her? What if she's hurt? Women who just had babies, they can get sick, right? They need to see doctors? Margaret had been thinking the same thing. Detective Rodriguez has people looking, Rosa. They'll find her. But days passed with no word. The town was in an uproar. People took sides without knowing all the facts. Some blamed Maya for abandoning her baby. Others blamed the Whitmores for creating an environment where a pregnant girl felt she had no choice. Still others blamed Ethan for being irresponsible. The Whitmore family had gone silent. Thomas had released a brief statement through a lawyer saying they were cooperating with the investigation and asking for privacy. But Margaret saw them at church that Sunday, sitting in their usual pew looking straight ahead while people whispered and stared. Jennifer Whitmore looked like she'd been crying. Thomas kept his face carefully neutral. Their other two children, a 16-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old son, looked confused and uncomfortable. After the service, Margaret did something she'd never done before. She walked up to the Whitmore family as they were leaving. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said quietly, "I'm Margaret Sullivan. I'm the one who found Hope." Jennifer turned to her and Margaret saw raw pain in the woman's eyes. "I know who you are. I want you to know that your granddaughter is beautiful and healthy and she's being well cared for." Jennifer's face crumpled slightly before she regained control. "Thank you." She stopped, seeming unable to find the right words. "This isn't what we wanted." "I know," Margaret said gently, "but sometimes what happens isn't about what we want. It's about what is." Thomas Whitmore put his hand on his wife's back, preparing to guide her away, but then he stopped and looked at Margaret. "Have they found Maya yet?" "Not yet." "When they do," Thomas said slowly, "please tell Rosa that we're not angry at her daughter. We're not going to—" He paused, struggling with something. "We're not going to make things difficult for their family. Rosa has been good to us. This situation is complicated, but it's not her fault." It wasn't much of an apology or acknowledgement, but coming from Thomas Whitmore, it was something. Margaret nodded. The breakthrough came on a Wednesday afternoon, 6 days after the DNA results were revealed. Linda called Margaret with the news. "We found her." "She's okay." Margaret felt her knees go weak with relief. "Where was she?" "A women's shelter 2 towns over." She walked there. It took her 3 days. The shelter doesn't require ID or ask questions, and she gave them a fake name. But when they saw the news about police looking for her, one of the workers recognized her picture. "Is she hurt?" "Physically, she's okay." The shelter had a nurse check her over. "Emotionally," Linda paused. "She's devastated, Margaret. Absolutely devastated. She keeps asking if Hope is okay, if someone is taking care of her, if the baby hates her for what she did." "Can I see her?" "She's asking for her mother. Rosa is with her now." "But Margaret, she wants to see you too. She says she wants to meet the woman who found her baby." 2 hours later, Margaret sat in a small room at the women's shelter with Maya Torres across from her. The girl looked so young, so thin, so utterly exhausted. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail and her eyes were swollen from crying. "Thank you for finding her," Maya said, her voice hoarse. "Thank you for making sure she was safe." Margaret felt tears spring to her own eyes. "Oh, honey, you don't need to thank me. You're the one who made sure she was safe. You left her somewhere you knew she'd be found and loved." "I didn't know what else to do," Maya whispered. "I couldn't keep her. I can't even take care of myself. How could I take care of a baby? But I couldn't—" She stopped, covering her face with her hands. "I couldn't tell my mom. She works so hard for us. The Whitmores pay her well, and we need that money. If they found out about me and Ethan, about the baby, they'd fire her. I know they would." "You don't know that," Margaret said gently. "Yes, I do," Maya said with absolute certainty. "They have plans for Ethan, big plans. And I'm just the housekeeper's daughter. I was never supposed to be part of those plans." They talked for over an hour. Maya told her everything. About falling in love with Ethan, about hiding the pregnancy, about giving birth alone and being so scared she thought she might die. About holding Hope for 5 days and falling completely in love with her, and then realizing that loving her meant letting her go. "I wrote that note about 20 times, Maya admitted. "I kept trying to explain, to say enough so that people would understand. But how do you explain something like this in a few sentences? How do you tell strangers that you're leaving your baby because you love her too much to ruin her life?" Margaret reached across the table and took Maya's hand. "You don't have to explain. You're 18 years old and you were in an impossible situation. Nobody who matters is judging you." "Everyone is judging me," Maya said bitterly. "The whole town knows now. Everyone knows what I did." "Then let them know the whole truth," Margaret said. "Let them know you're not a girl who abandoned her baby. You're a mother who made an impossible choice because she wanted her daughter to have the best chance at life." Maya looked up at her with red, swollen eyes. "Do you really believe that?" "I know that," Margaret said firmly. "And in time, everyone else will too." What Margaret didn't say was that the hardest part was still ahead. Now that Maya had been found, now that everything was out in the open, the real questions had to be answered. What would happen to Hope? Where would she go? And could the families involved find a way forward that wouldn't destroy everyone in the process? The storm that had been building over Riverside Springs was about to break wide open. The legal proceedings began exactly 1 week after Maya was found. Margaret sat in the courtroom, watching as a judge who looked too young to have such power over people's lives reviewed the stack of papers in front of him. Maya sat at one table with a lawyer who'd taken her case for free, her mother beside her holding her hand. At another table sat a representative from Child Protective Services, and in the back of the courtroom, keeping their distance, were Thomas and Jennifer Whitmore. Ethan had driven home from college and sat between his parents, his face pale and drawn. The judge listened to everyone's statements. He heard how Maya had hidden her pregnancy, given birth alone, kept the baby for 5 days, and then left her at the church. He heard about the DNA test that proved Ethan's paternity. He heard from doctors about Maya's physical and mental state. He heard from social workers about Hope's current placement with the Kowalskis. "This is one of the most difficult cases I've handled," Judge Martinez said finally. "Ms. Torres, I want you to understand something. What you did, leaving your infant in a public place, is illegal. You could be charged with child abandonment. Do you understand that?" Maya nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, sir. However," the judge continued, "I also understand that you're 18 years old, you were terrified, and you made absolutely certain that your daughter would be found quickly and safely. You didn't leave her somewhere dangerous. You didn't hurt her. By all accounts, you cared for her properly during the days you had her." He looked around the courtroom. "That said, we now have to determine what's in the best interest of this child. Ms. Torres, are you prepared to care for an infant? Do you have stable housing? Income, support?" Maya's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, Ms. Torres is living with her mother in a 2-bedroom apartment. She was planning to attend community college this fall and work part-time. Her mother has a stable job and has offered to help with childcare. And what about the father?" Judge Martinez looked at Ethan. "Mr. Whitmore, you're 19 years old and currently enrolled in college 3 hours away. What role do you intend to play in this child's life?" Ethan stood up and Margaret could see his hands shaking. "I want to be involved, Your Honor. I want to help support my daughter. I made a mistake by not standing up sooner, by letting Maya go through this alone. I don't want to make that mistake again." Thomas Whitmore shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Margaret noticed Jennifer reach over and put her hand on her husband's arm, either to comfort him or to keep him from saying something. The judge ordered DNA tests to be officially filed, mandated that both Maya and Ethan undergo counseling, and set up a series of supervised visits between Maya and Hope. The final custody decision would be made in 6 months, giving everyone time to prove they could provide a stable environment for the baby. As they filed out of the courtroom, Margaret watched the two families carefully avoid each other. But then something unexpected happened. Jennifer Whitmore walked over to where Rosa Torres stood with her daughter. "Mrs. Torres," Jennifer said, her voice formal but not unkind. "Could we speak for a moment?" Rosa looked uncertain but nodded. Margaret, standing nearby, couldn't help but overhear. "I want you to know that your job is secure," Jennifer said. "This situation with our children, it's complicated and difficult, but it's not your fault. You've worked for us for 15 years, and you've been nothing but loyal and hardworking." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore. I was so worried." "You don't need to worry," Jennifer interrupted gently. "And Maya." She turned to the young woman who looked terrified. "I'm not going to pretend I'm not upset or that this is easy for our family, but I'm also a mother. I understand being scared and making choices you think are best, even when they're hard." It wasn't a warm embrace or a declaration of acceptance, but it was something, a small crack in the wall that had been built between them. Over the next few weeks, Margaret watched as the town slowly processed everything that had happened. The initial scandal and gossip started to fade, replaced by more nuanced conversations about the pressures young people face, about class divisions in small towns, about what it means to support families in crisis. The local paper ran a series of articles about resources for pregnant teenagers, about adoption versus foster care, about the challenges of teen parenting. The high school started talking about expanding their health education programs. Churches began organizing support groups for young parents. But not everyone was sympathetic. Margaret overheard plenty of harsh judgments at the grocery store, at the gas station, at church. She should have thought about consequences before she got pregnant, one woman said loudly. In the produce section, the Whitmores should have kept a better eye on their son, another added. That baby would be better off adopted by a real family, a third voice chimed in. Margaret had stayed. quiet through most of these conversations, but this time she couldn't hold back. She turned to face the three women, all of whom she'd known for years. "That baby has a real family," she said firmly. "She has a mother who loved her enough to make sure she was safe, even when it meant giving her up. She has a father who's trying to step up and do the right thing. And she has two grandmothers and two families who are all trying to figure out how to move forward. Maybe instead of judging, we should be supporting them." The women looked startled, then embarrassed. One of them mumbled an apology. Margaret picked up her bananas and walked away, her heart pounding. She wasn't usually one to make scenes, but she'd had enough of the gossip. Maya's supervised visits with Hope started 2 weeks after the court hearing. Margaret asked if she could be there for the first one, and both Maya and the social worker agreed. They met at a family services office, a place designed to look welcoming but which somehow still felt institutional, with its cheerful posters and plastic toys. When the social worker brought Hope in, Margaret watched Maya's face transform. All the fear and exhaustion fell away, replaced by pure love. Maya reached for her daughter with trembling hands, and the baby settled into her arms like she belonged there. "Hi, baby girl," Maya whispered. "Hi, Hope, it's Mama. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Margaret had to look away, her own eyes filling with tears. The social worker discreetly stepped back, giving them space while still maintaining supervision. For an hour, Maya held her daughter, fed her, changed her diaper, sang softly to her. She was gentle and competent, moving with the muscle memory of those 5 days she'd cared for Hope alone. When the visit was over and she had to give the baby back, Maya looked like her heart was breaking all over again. "You're doing great," Margaret told her afterward. "She knows you. Did you see how she settled right down in your arms?" "I just want to take her home," Maya said, wiping her eyes. "I know I have to prove myself. I know I have to do all the classes and the counseling and everything they're asking. But I just want my baby back." "You'll get there," Margaret assured her, "one day at a time." Ethan started coming home on weekends to visit Hope. At first, his visits were separate from Maya's, but eventually the social worker suggested they start visiting together, since they'd need to learn to co-parent. Margaret attended some of those sessions too, and she watched as two scared kids slowly learned how to be parents. They were awkward with each other at first, their conversations stilted and formal. But with Hope between them, something shifted. They remembered why they'd fallen in love in the first place. They talked about their daughter's future, about what they wanted for her, about their own mistakes and fears. "I should have told my parents right away," Ethan said during one visit. "When you first told me you were pregnant, I was a coward." "We were both scared," Maya replied, gently rocking Hope. "We were kids. We still are, really. But we have to grow up fast now." "Yeah, we do." The Whitmore family's involvement was slower and more complicated. Thomas remained distant, attending court hearings but saying little. But Jennifer started showing up to some of the supervised visits, sitting quietly in the corner, watching her son with his daughter. After one visit, Jennifer approached Maya. "She has Ethan's eyes," she said softly, "and his grandmother's nose. My mother's nose." Maya looked uncertain how to respond. "She's a beautiful baby." "Yes, she is." Jennifer paused, seeming to struggle with something. "I need you to understand, when Thomas and I found out about this, we didn't know what to think. We've spent 19 years planning Ethan's future, and this wasn't part of it. But she's our granddaughter, and after these past few weeks, after thinking about everything, I realized that maybe our plans don't matter as much as we thought they did." It was the closest thing to an apology that Jennifer Whitmore had offered, and Maya accepted it with a quiet nod. Rosa's relationship with the Whitmores remained complicated. She continued working for them, but there was a new tension in the house that hadn't existed before. Jennifer made an effort to be kinder, more personal in their interactions. Thomas remained formal and distant, but neither of them had fired her, and both had made it clear that her job was secure regardless of what happened with the children. The mandated counseling sessions were difficult for everyone involved. Maya had to confront the trauma of giving birth alone and the guilt of leaving her baby. Ethan had to face his own cowardice and learn to stand up to his parents. Both of them had to learn practical skills: how to budget for a baby, how to create a safe living environment, how to manage their time between school, work, and parenting. Margaret continued visiting Hope regularly, maintaining her connection to the baby she'd found. But she also became something more, a bridge between the families, a neutral party who could speak honestly to everyone involved. "You're like Switzerland," Linda Rodriguez joked one day over coffee. "Completely neutral but somehow involved in everyone's business," Margaret laughed. "I just want what's best for that baby. And I think what's best for her is having all these people in her life, messy and complicated as it might be." As the 6-month deadline approached, everyone prepared for the final custody hearing. Maya had completed all her requirements: parenting classes, counseling, stable employment at a local retail store. Ethan had maintained regular visits and was contributing financially. The Kowalskis reported that Hope was thriving. The question now was what came next. Would Hope go back to Maya? Would there be shared custody with Ethan? What role would the extended families play? Would this small town, torn apart by scandal, find a way to come together for the sake of one very small child? Margaret prayed about it every night, sitting in the same church pew where she'd found Hope all those months ago. She prayed for wisdom for the judge, strength for the families, and most of all, love and security for a baby who'd entered the world in secrecy and fear, but who deserved to grow up surrounded by people who wanted her. The final hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in April, 6 months and 2 weeks after that Sunday morning when Margaret had heard a baby cry and found a note that said, "Please give her the life I cannot." Now everyone would find out what that life would actually look like. The courthouse was more crowded than Margaret had ever seen it. Word had spread about the final custody hearing, and it seemed like half of Riverside Springs had shown up. Some people came out of genuine concern for Hope's future. Others came for the spectacle. Margaret wished she could tell them all to go home, that this wasn't entertainment. This was real people's lives hanging in the balance. She sat in her usual spot, 3 rows back on the left side. Maya and Rosa sat up front with their lawyer, a woman named Patricia Chen who'd done this work for 20 years and had a reputation for fighting hard for her clients. Ethan sat with his parents, though Margaret noticed he kept glancing over at Maya, like he wanted to be sitting with her instead. The Kowalskis were there too, holding Hope, who was now 7 months old and had grown into a chubby, happy baby with dark curls and those eyes that everyone said came from Ethan's side of the family. Margaret's heart clenched every time she looked at her. How had she gotten so attached to a child who wasn't even hers? Judge Martinez entered and everyone stood. He looked tired, Margaret thought. This case had dragged on for months with hearing after hearing, report after report. She didn't envy him the decision he had to make. "I've reviewed all the materials submitted by both parties," the judge began once everyone was seated. "I've read the reports from Child Protective Services, the evaluations from the court-appointed psychologist, the statements from family members and character witnesses. I've considered the financial situations, living arrangements, and support systems available to this child." He paused, looking around the courtroom. "I want to be clear about something before I announce my decision. This case has generated a lot of attention in your community, a lot of opinions. But my job isn't to punish anyone or to make judgments about past choices. My only job is to determine what is in the best interest of this child, Hope Torres Whitmore." Margaret noticed that he'd used both last names. That was new. "Miss Torres," the judge continued, looking at Maya, "6 months ago, you were an 18-year-old girl who made a series of choices that, while understandable given your circumstances, were nonetheless illegal and dangerous. However, in the time since then, you have done everything asked of you and more. You completed parenting classes. You maintained steady employment. You've never missed a scheduled visit with your daughter. You've demonstrated maturity, responsibility, and genuine love for this child." Maya was crying silently, her mother's arm around her shoulders. "Mr. Whitmore," the judge said, turning to Ethan, "you could have walked away from this situation. Many young men in your position would have. Instead, you acknowledged your responsibility, maintained regular involvement in your daughter's life, and contributed financially to her care despite being a college student. You've also completed the required counseling and parenting education." Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "Based on everything I've reviewed, I'm granting primary physical custody to Miss Torres, with a formal parenting plan that gives Mr. Whitmore regular visitation and shared legal custody. This means both parents will be involved in major decisions about Hope's education, medical care, and upbringing." A ripple went through the courtroom. Margaret let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Maya's face showed relief mixed with disbelief, like she couldn't quite believe this was real. However, Judge Martinez continued, and the room went quiet again. I'm also ordering that both families participate in ongoing family counseling. This child needs to grow up knowing both sides of her family. She needs grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. She needs the Torres family and the Whitmore family to find a way to work together for her benefit. Thomas Whitmore's face was unreadable. Jennifer was wiping her eyes with a tissue. Miss Torres, your daughter will be returned to your custody today, under the supervision of Child Protective Services. They'll be checking in regularly for the next year to ensure everything is going smoothly. Do not make me regret this decision. I won't, Your Honor, Maya said, her voice shaking. I promise. Thank you. Thank you so much. The hearing wrapped up quickly after that, with lawyers discussing details and scheduling follow-up meetings. But Margaret barely heard any of it. She was watching Maya, who had moved to where the Kowalskis sat with Hope. The older couple smiled and handed the baby over, and Maya held her daughter close, sobbing into her dark curls. We'll miss her, Mrs. Kowalski said, also crying. But we're so glad she's going home with you. Ethan approached slowly and Maya looked up at him. Without words, she shifted Hope so they were both holding her. Both parents together with their daughter for the first time without a social worker watching and taking notes. Margaret found herself standing next to Rosa, who was crying so hard she could barely stand. Margaret put her arm around the other woman's shoulders. Your daughter did it, Margaret said. She got her baby back. I still can't believe it, Rosa whispered. I thought for sure they'd say she was too young, too poor, too unprepared. I thought they'd give Hope to some rich family who could give her everything. Hope doesn't need everything, Margaret said. She just needs love. And she's going to have plenty of that. The celebration that followed was small but meaningful. Father Tom opened up the church fellowship hall and people brought food. It wasn't planned. People just started showing up with casseroles and cookies and drinks wanting to mark the occasion, to show Maya and her family that the community supported them. The Whitmore family didn't come to the celebration, but Jennifer called later that evening. Margaret only knew because Maya told her about it afterward. She said she wanted to set up a regular schedule for visits, Maya explained, still seeming stunned by everything. She said Hope should know her grandparents on both sides. And then she said, Maya's voice broke. She said she was sorry. For everything. For not being more welcoming when they found out about me and Ethan. For not supporting us from the beginning. That must have taken a lot of courage for her to say, Margaret observed. I guess everyone's learning to be brave, Maya said, looking down at Hope, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms. I have to be brave every day now. Being a mom is the scariest thing I've ever done. Welcome to motherhood, Margaret said with a smile. The fear never completely goes away, but neither does the love.